Good afternoon, everyone. We will be starting in a minute or so. Thank you, everyone, for joining Drupal for Gov's November webinar. Our topic for this month is mobile accessibility, building accessible mobile sites. Our speaker is Gian Wild. Gian, did I pronounce your name correctly? I hope so.
Yeah, it's Gian,
Gian,
but
okay.
no one can guess it because it's originally an Italian name and it's not pronounced the Italian name. It's just it's just pronounced, yeah, the way my parents thought it should be pronounced.
A beautiful name. Thank you.
Thank
Before
you.
Before I hand over the mic to Dion, I would like to cover some housekeeping. You may be familiar with Drupal for Gov, but we are an open source community of advocates of open source. So in addition to this webinar that we hold every third Thursday at 3 p.m., our biggest event is Drupal GovCon. And I am so excited to mention that announce that we will have our conference in 2025, August 13th through the 15th at the University of Maryland. So look out for more information regarding that. Global training days, we have those when we can, and we have the space where we give out free training. And we also assist in organizing Gov Summit at DrupalCon North America. If you're interested in sharing any additional information or you have the space to actually hold a half-day training, please reach out to us at drupalforgov@gmail.com. We're also available on Twitter and we are really active on LinkedIn. Special shout out to our sponsor for this month, Mobomo. They are a full service DevOps and digital transformation provider who specialize in web, mobile, and infrastructure and cloud applications to the federal agencies and large enterprise. So I mentioned Drupal GovCon, but there are also other Drupal events that are happening, mostly in 2025. February 21st to the 23rd, Florida is having their Drupal camp, March 3rd through the 5th, March 13th through the 15th, Drupal Camp, New Jersey, and Atlanta's Drupal Camp is March 24th through the 27th, and Mid Camp happens May 25th through the 22nd. As I mentioned earlier, if you're interested in hosting a half-day or a multi-day, please reach out to us at info@drupalforgov.us. We would love to talk to you. And if you miss a session, we are actively live streaming this webinar. So you can also watch it on YouTube and it can be found after the webinar. And I am excited to introduce Gian Wild. I hope I still pronounced that correctly. She is the CEO of Accessibility Oz. She has offices in Australia and United States, and she has worked in the accessibility area since 1998. Gian, welcome. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that you can take over.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Nanika. I should have checked how to pronounce your name. Did I pronounce your name correctly?
Yeah, yes, you did. You did.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. I'm just going to share my screen.
And all questions, please add them to the chat and she will answer them.
I shall. Um, so first off, I would like to acknowledge the Yugara people as the traditional owners of the land that I'm currently on. I live in Queensland, in the Gold Coast hinterland area, and it has a very strong and continuing tradition with the Aboriginal owners of the area. So I just want to say that you can access this presentation and anything else. I'll put a link to the YouTube live stream and things like that on the Accessibility Oz website. And I will put up this PowerPoint immediately after this presentation. So you can definitely grab this PowerPoint and I'll probably put a link into it in the Drupal for Gov's YouTube channel. So first off, thank you for coming. Secondly, I'd like you to meet our team. This is a photo taken in 2018, BC, I like to say, before COVID. This is about 2/3 of my team at CSUN in Los Angeles in 2018. So even though I'm Australian, we have staff all around the world and clients all around the world, including, of course, the US. Anyway, so when I started Accessibility Oz in 2011, I wanted to support people with disabilities by providing them with employment opportunities as well as, making websites an accessible place. So when I wanted to ensure that the number of staff in my organization with a disability was the same or higher as the population is in a whole. So 20% of all people have some kind of significant disability that affects their daily life. That doesn't include, things like the need to wear glasses or anything like that. And I'm very proud to say that over the almost 14 years that we've been operating, that we've had always 60% or more of my staff having some kind of significant disability. So over the years, the kind of disabilities that we have had as staff include dyslexia, moderate vision impairment, severe vision impairment, epilepsy, migraines, physical impairment, fibromyalgia, multiple sclerosis, Crohn's disease, post-traumatic stress disorder, autism, and long COVID. I personally suffer from long COVID. I caught it at CSUN in 2023, so I'm about 18 months in, and it definitely has affected my work. But one of the things that I want you to know is that it's not just about vision impairments. A lot of people, especially if they're new to accessibility, think that accessibility is only about, people who are blind or people who use screen readers. That's absolutely not the case. In fact, the largest group of people with disabilities who use the web are people with cognitive disabilities. So a little bit about me, why should you listen to me? I started in 1998. I like to joke that I started when I was 4 years old, but I was a little bit older than that. I worked on the very first accessible website in Australia. I created Australia's first automated accessibility testing tool. I spent 6 years working with the W3C, contributing to the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines version 2. I worked on the 2006 Commonwealth Games and every Commonwealth Games since then. And then I spent 5 years managing usability and accessibility services at Monash University. And I left there in 2011 to found Accessibility Oz. We released OzPlayer, our accessible video player, in 2013, OzArt, our automated accessibility testing tool, in 2014. In 2015, I spoke at the United Nations on the importance of web accessibility, and I became the chair of the Mobile Site and Native App Accessibility Testing Committee from 2017 and still am. I was also nominated for Australian of the Year, and I was also the inaugural Accessibility Person of the Year in 2019. So a little background about, these guidelines that can help you build an accessible site. So firstly, why did we develop this methodology? There's this thing called, WCAG, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. Shouldn't that be enough to, make your mobile sites accessible? And unfortunately, the answer is no. So back in 2017, there are a bunch of accessibility testers at this conference called the ICT Accessibility Testing Symposium. And at the end of the conference each year, we'd have a town hall where everyone would speak about, what was affecting the industry at the time. And overwhelmingly, everyone agreed in 2017 that mobile accessibility was the problem. WCAG 2.1 hadn't been released. And so we all knew, all the accessibility testing companies knew that WCAG 2 wasn't sufficient, and we'd all come up with our own mobile guidelines. And, it just didn't seem to make sense that we were all developing, basically reinventing the wheel. So we decided to get together as a bipartisan committee and develop, or actually amalgamate everyone's mobile accessibility testing standards. And we thought, this is one and done because, WCAG 2.1 is going to be out in 2018. So, this is just until WCAG 2.1, is released, and it's going to address everything that we need with mobile. So this is a bipartisan group set of guidelines. And yes, they are testing guidelines. They absolutely can be used by developers. There's a lot of information in the documentation, which I'll talk about a little bit later, about why you would do things, examples, how you would test it, etc. So yes, they are called testing guidelines, but they're absolutely valuable for developers. And, part of me sort of believes that they're more useful for developers than testers. Okay, so, we were going to, we released these in 2018, and then we really realized that we'd have to actually release another version because we weren't happy as an industry with WCAG 2.1. And this is actually very common in the accessibility industry. So the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines version 1, which was released in 1999, actually only became a W3C project in 1998. It was a bipartisan group of accessibility specialists who actually came up with the guidelines in 1995. So it's very common for accessibility specialists to sort of get together and say, hey, these guidelines are not enough. So before we talk about WCAG 2.1, let's talk about why WCAG 2 is not good enough for mobile. So WCAG 2 success criteria are absolutely applicable to mobile. So, you've got a mobile site, you need to have coded headings, you need to have alt attributes that, describe images, etc., etc., all those things that are covered in WCAG 2. And as an example, WCAG 2 requires site be accessible only to the keyboard user, to the keyboard user only, but it doesn't require that sites only be accessible to the touchscreen user or to the mouse user. So, there were a couple of things that were missed. And the reason why that is because the majority of the guidelines were actually written between 2000 and 2006, and the iPhone only came out in 2007. So as a committee, as a working group, us, the people who are on the working group, we didn't really, understand the whole concept of mobile sites and native apps. There were mobile sites before that, but, they're on tiny little Nokia screens and they were like black and white. We never thought that, they'd be as ubiquitous as they are today. So, it's these things happen. The world changes and, guidelines have to change with them. And, the WCAG 2 was released in 2008 and WCAG 2.1 was released in 2018. And 10 years is a very long time between guidelines. WCAG 2.2 was released in 2023. So at least there's only a 5-year difference. But still, it's taking a while for the W3C to catch up. So, okay, why was WCAG 2.1 not sufficient when it comes to mobile accessibility? So, we amalgamated all these accessibility testing companies' mobile guidelines. And one thing that we all agreed on was regarding touch target size. So basically the size of a touch target when you tap on it. And we all said that that had to be a minimum of a certain, pixel level, etc. And that requirement was in WCAG 2.1, but it was relegated to level AAA. There are 3 levels in WCAG 2. Level A, the minimum, level A, the medium, level AAA, the highest. Almost all policy organizations require AA compliance, and a lot of, AAA is very often ignored. In fact, I have a little quote that is, AAA is where success criteria go to die. So even though it was something that all the accessibility companies agreed on as being really, really important, it was relegated to AAA in WCAG 2.1. So we decided that we'd reform the committee, and instead of just amalgamating the guidelines, we'd start again. So we came up with these sets of guidelines. So what about WCAG 2.2? Okay, so the guidelines that I'm talking about were released in 2020, so they don't include WCAG 2.2. We are reforming the committee. I am, as the chair, have kind of dropped the ball due to, the whole long COVID thing. So we are hoping to reform it. And if you are interested, we would love to have you involved. So one of the things that you need to be aware of with these guidelines is that they include the errors that are in WCAG 2.1, but they don't include the errors that are in WCAG 2. So they don't say alt attributes need to be included, but the pointer gesture requirements and things of WCAG 2.1 are included. And it's very clear where those references are. So where can you find them? So they're on our website, the Accessibility Oz website. And I can hear you saying, I thought you said this was a bipartisan set of guidelines. And they are a huge number of accessibility companies contributed to these, and they were originally on the conference's website, the ICT Accessibility Testing Symposium's conference's website, but I kept finding typos in my use, and Chris Law, who runs the conference, was like, after a few of these changes, was like, just put it on your website, we'll point to you. So they are on the Accessibility Oz website. If you go to the homepage, which is accessibilityoz.com, you go to the resources main menu and then mobile testing. And you can see here there's an introduction, a note on WCAG 2.1, mobile sites versus native apps, hybrid native apps. And then there are 2 sets of methodologies. Now, we're only talking about mobile sites today, but there is actually a native app testing methodology as well. So for both methodologies, there's 5 documents. So the first document is about the methodology itself. So this is basically the equivalent of the success criterion in WCAG 2. So these are the rules. Then there's a second document, which is kind of like about the testing. So devices, assistive technologies, site types, variations of a page, capturing errors, etc. So a lot of what I talk about today, if you're just, oh, wow, I have no idea what you're talking about, that's fine. It's all in this document. And then the test cases are split into 3 groups: critical test cases, and test cases for assistive technology and mobile. And I've put the link in the chat. So first off, let's talk about mobile issues specifically. So how is mobile different to desktop? Why is it that it's just so important that we have a new set of guidelines? So the first thing is that when it comes to mobile devices, they have native screen readers. And yes, it is true that there are native screen readers in Mac, which is VoiceOver, and Windows, which is Narrator. But they are not, so when it comes to Windows, Narrator is actually not very commonly used. You can actually install other screen readers in a way that you can't with mobile devices. So you are restricted to the main two native screen readers on mobile devices, which is TalkBack on Android and VoiceOver on iOS. And of course, there are always exceptions to the rule. Samsung has a different screen reader called Voice Assistant. Amazon has something called Voice View, but usually those two are still available. And people who rely on screen readers are going to prefer those native screen readers than anything like, that's device specific. So there's a lot more volume use in mobile devices. So the volume control is also incredibly easy to manipulate when it comes to mobile devices. You have basically a haptic keyboard, so a keyboard that gives you feedback when you use it. Visual, auditory, and vibrational notifications. You have screen rotation. So, I'm sitting in front of my laptop and 3 screens, and my screens are all in the landscape orientation, whereas most of us use our mobile phones in the portrait orientation. But the other thing is you can change orientation in a way that you can't on desktop. Then there's things like mono audio and voice control, where you can actually, use a website just with your voice, increase text and display size, reduction of motion, zoom, and there's a reader view, simplified view on mobile devices as well. Now, most of these things have an equivalent desktop assistive technology, but you often have to purchase it or, go looking for it. And when it comes to mobile, these assistive technologies or features are much easier to access. And so a lot of people who wouldn't necessarily categorize themselves as disabled actually use these features. So I use dark mode on my mobile phone, which is the equivalent of invert colors on desktop. So instead of black text on a white background, I read black text on it. Black text, white text on a black background. Just had a moment there. That's something that I don't have on my desktop. I could certainly install it, but I don't use that, but I do on mobile phones. So you find a much larger percentage of people are using these features on mobile than they are on desktop. Another thing to be aware of is this thing called page variations. So as part of WCAG2, you need to be able to zoom to 200%. As part of WCAG 2.1, you need to zoom to 400%. And once you have zoomed to that level, you need to make sure that no functionality is missing and there's no overlap or anything like that. But what this means, because of the way that most mobile sites are built, is that low vision users who use the zoom function inherent in the browser on desktop often end up being restricted to a mobile view of the site on their desktop. Now, I just want to say for the developers out there that the decision that the committee made when it came to modifying, responsive websites was to determine it based on screen size. So not browser sniffing or anything like that, screen size. So this is absolutely something that, happens, and we're not saying it shouldn't happen. But what it means is that it's essential that functionality is not removed due to a variation in a page. So what you see on the biggest screen versus, your mobile device, it should be the same functionality and content. It can be displayed in a different way, but you still need to be able to get access to everything on your mobile device versus your desktop website. So for those, if that's as an example, this is YouTube at 100% on desktop. This is an old example. They have absolutely fixed this, but it's just a really good example. And you can see, viewing it on your desktop screen, your top right-hand corner, you have your upload button and your notifications button. Now, if you increase the text size by going Control+ on your desktop, you end up with a much larger kind of view, and those upload and notifications disappear. The other thing that you notice is on the left, you have a hamburger menu, whereas, when you look at it at 100%, it's not like that. So why would this happen? This happens because YouTube assumes that if you're looking at it at this size, that you're looking at it on a mobile device, and they don't want you to upload using their mobile site. They want you to use a native app. So they've removed that functionality. You can't do this because that means that low vision users won't have that functionality when they look at the site on desktop. So another thing to be aware of when it comes to mobile is the concept of accessibility supported. And that basically means that you need to use the features inherent in a technology to support assistive technology. Now, this means when it comes to testing, this is much more applicable to native apps, but also applicable to mobile sites. You really need to test with assistive technologies in a way that you don't when it comes to desktop. WCAG2 was written so that you don't need to do assistive technology. The theory behind WCAG2 is if you followed all the requirements, you wouldn't then need to test with keyboard, or you wouldn't need to test, well, actually you do for WCAG2. Well, you wouldn't need to test with a screen reader or with a magnifier. If you follow WCAG2, your code should be clear enough to be interpreted by assistive technologies properly. Now, particularly with native apps where you can't access the code, the only way to actually find alternatives is often to use the mobile assistive technology. But because assistive technologies are used so frequently with mobile devices, it is something that you need to consider in your testing with mobile sites much more than desktop sites. So the Android assistive technology and features that are included in this methodology are talkback, keyboard and switch, magnification, remove animations, color inversion, grayscale, color correction, increase display size, increase font size, increase text size with Chrome, and simplified view, and that's only with Chrome. For iPhone, there is voiceover, keyboard and switch, zoom, reduce motion, invert colors, grayscale, larger text, which is native app only, reader view, which is mobile site only, and reader view and increased text size, which is mobile site only. And unfortunately, iPad has a completely different operating system to the iPhone, so you have to test all those things on an iPad as well. Okay, let's talk about testing methods. So there are 4 main testing methods for mobile sites. So the first one is devices, so testing on actual devices, actual mobile and tablet devices. It's not sufficient to test on a simulator. And then devices with assistive technology, which is testing on mobile and tablet devices with assistive technology. Then a responsive window, which is testing on a responsively sized window on desktop, and then testing on desktop. Now, I know this is not about native apps, but just so you know that when it comes to native apps, there are only 2 main testing methods: testing with devices and testing with devices with assistive technologies. Now, why is it necessary to test with actual devices? So this is an example of it's a decade old now. So back in 2014, I did a lot of flying to and from America, and there was no Wi-Fi on the planes. But the good thing is that when you landed in LAX, you could access the LAX Wi-Fi. So as in, when we'd often sit on the tarmac for a couple of hours. So having access to the Wi-Fi was definitely a bonus. And the flights from Australia are 15 and a half hours long. So it's a long time to go without Wi-Fi. So when you logged in, you get this page. It says this page will redirect, so content doesn't really make sense to have here. Now that page doesn't redirect, and all of a sudden I don't feel safe that I've given you my contact details. Now, how does this happen? This happens because was built on someone's desktop computer and they never went to the location and actually tested it. So this is why you have to test with real devices. The number of times that we have seen the simulator doing something completely different to the device. I wish I had $1 for every time. And you don't have to go overboard. Having just one iPhone and one Android device phone running the latest versions is sufficient with testing. And you might find within your organization that there are enough people who just have those phones. It doesn't have to be the latest version of the phone either. So you can get one that's a couple of years old and use that. So testing with real devices, if you take one thing away from that, is when you're building a site, when you're testing a site, make sure you test with real devices. So let's talk about the methodologies. So there's the mobile site testing methodology has 5 steps, which is very similar to the native app testing methodology, has 5 steps as well. The only difference is the second step. So the first step is identify devices. The second step is identify site type and variations. Step 3 is test critical issues. Step 4 is test mobile specific issues. And step 5, test mobile assistive technology and feature support. So first step, identifying devices. So in the United States and Australia and other Western countries, iOS devices are by far the most popular. However, in Asia and other Eastern countries, Android devices are most popular. So keep that in mind when it comes to testing. And I would say when you test or you build for the most common device that your site is aimed for. The best way to find which devices is to review your analytics system. And if you find that, 90% of Android users are using Samsung phones, then test on Samsung. Be aware, though, that due to the popularity of the Android system, there are tens of thousands of Android's operating system and browser combinations available. Clearly not possible to test on all of these. So you have to pick, one or two. The other thing is the internet browser that comes pre-packaged with most Samsung phones is very dependent on the operating system. It's much better to download Chrome. That's a much better representation of what you will see across Android devices. So Safari on iOS and Chrome on your Android phone. And also, just because an assistive technology is called the same across desktop and mobile, i.e. VoiceOver, doesn't mean they behave the same. So if you have a site and you know that it works with Mac with VoiceOver, that doesn't mean it'll work on iOS with VoiceOver. And there's a great survey called the WebAIM Screen Reader Survey, which explains, what the percentage of different people use in terms of screen readers. So that's definitely worth having a look at. And as I mentioned, there are also additional device screen readers, such as the voice assistant with Samsung and the Amazon Fire using VoiceView. Look at your statistics and see if those devices are being used in capacity. So the basically what we recommend that you test with is iPhone, Safari, iPad, Safari, Android phone, Chrome, and consider an Android tablet with Chrome and alternative devices such as a Kindle device if your users are using them. So we recommend testing on the latest version of iOS and iPad OS and the latest 2 versions of Android. However, in the few years that I've been using this methodology, I've found that it is sufficient to test on the latest version of Android. So that actually means you only need 3 devices: iPhone, Android phone, iPad. And when a site is directly aimed at a person or people with a particular kind of disability, consider including assistive technologies or devices used by potential users. So if you have a site that's about acquired brain injury, then ensure that you have someone testing it who uses Dragon Naturally Speaking or Windows speech recognition, because those are the most common devices used by people who have brain injury. So just another reminder that it's not sufficient just to meet this methodology. You have to meet WCAG2 as well. So the second step is identify site type and variations of the page. Now, as developers, you probably know exactly what I'm talking about. But if not, this information is all in the documentation. So is the site desktop, MDOT, or responsive? So if the site is responsive, are there variations of a page? So basically, a desktop website is one that has only one display, whether viewed on desktop or mobile or a tablet device. The MDOT sites are ones that have a particular display for mobile and tablet display, sites, and it's not actually a display, it's a completely different site. So you end up having two sites, what's called the MDOT site and the www site, and that means you have to test both sites on desktop and mobile. So you double the amount of work you need to do because they are completely different sites. And don't assume that no one will look at the MDOT site on desktop, because they will. And don't assume that no one will look at the www website on mobile, because they will. In fact, mobile browsers have an option to say, show me the desktop site. So you need to do a lot of testing for MDOT sites. Yeah, don't use MDOT sites if you can get away with it. Responsive websites are definitely what you should be using. These are sites that change depending on the screen size or other feature as determined by the developer. And as I said before, the screen size change is the only way that the committee felt was accessible in terms of providing different versions of a site. So it's something that's really important. Now, when it comes to and I just want to clarify, sorry, I just lost my mouse. Even if the site is a desktop site, people will still use that on mobile. So, once again, you can find these methodologies on the Accessibility Oz website under the resources menu. I'm just going to put that in the chat again. And also this presentation will be up on the conferences page of our site, Accessibility Oz, and it will also be on Drupal4Gov's YouTube session. So yeah, you can absolutely access this later. Okay, so the next step is test critical issues. So what we have found in our investigations is that there were a lot more traps on mobile devices than on desktops. Now, a trap is where a user is trapped within a component and cannot escape without closing the browser or an app. So this is very common in the late 2000s with Firefox and video players. So this is why we actually developed OzPlayer. And basically, if you tabbed into a video player in Firefox, you couldn't tab out and you couldn't escape in any way using the keyboard. So the only way to actually get out of that trap was to close the browser and start again. So it's a critical error in WCAG2. Keyboard trap is one of the success criterion. But what we found when we were testing with mobile is that there's actually a number of other traps that occur on mobile and not on desktop. And so these are what were the critical issues. So there is the exit trap, the swipe scroll trap, the text to speech trap, the headset trap, and the layer trap. So the exit trap requirement is ensure there is always an accessible actionable item, e.g. a close button that meets color contrast requirements and has an accessible name that closes any feature that overlays the current page, such as the full page ad. So this applies to all users and it's both methodologies. And so this is an example here. You've got Facebook, you've got an ad that overlays almost all of the page. The back button in the top left doesn't do anything. The URL doesn't do anything. And the only way to get back to the page is to hit this small area of white at the bottom. This is a much more common exit trap. You see this a lot with mobile devices. It's a pop-up as soon as you access the site. And the close button is there, but it's, pretty bad. It doesn't meet touch target size requirements and it doesn't meet color contrast requirements. Now, you could say, well, you can tap outside of the dialog box to close it, but some users can't. So if that some users are reliant on that close button, and if you can't see it and you can't access it, then it's not there. And that makes the entire site completely inaccessible to them. And then there's the swipe scroll trap. So ensure you do not override standard mobile touch functions, swiping, scrolling, etc. on the majority of the page. This applies to touch users and it's both methodologies. So this is what I call the Zoom of Doom. This is a Coles website. Coles is a grocery store in Australia. And if you tried to scroll anywhere outside of those small areas of white outside the map, you would scroll the map instead of the page. So you had to hit that tiny couple of pixels of white above the map or a couple of pixels of white on the side of the map to actually scroll the page. So that's a swipe scroll trap. Then we have a text-to-speech trap, which is if the app has an ability to provide content via text-to-speech, the screen reader user must be able to pause or stop the app speaking in a simple manner, e.g. by performing a swipe on a screen. So this applies to screen reader users, and it's currently only in the native app methodology, but I've started to see it in mobile sites as well. So as building mobile sites, this is something else to be aware of. So this is an example. This is the native app Pocket, where you have a play button and it can play the article, read it aloud instead of you reading it. And you can activate that by pressing enter, but then there's no easy way to stop the article being spoken. So screen reader users can't stop the text to speech. That's what TTS stands for. And they should just be able to tap or something. They have to navigate through the native app. And what screen readers do is they read aloud the content on the page. So they're reading aloud the content on the page so the screen reader user can navigate through the page, conflicts with the audio of the article being read aloud, and it's just an absolute mess, and the screen reader user can't do anything but close the app. So this is the next one is the headset trap, which is headset users must always be able to pause media, audio or video content by using the pause play control on the headset. So this is for screen reader users and headset users, and it's both methodologies. So this is an example here of a website. You have a pop-up video at the bottom. Don't you just love those? And it has audio. And as a visual touch user, you can tap the mute button in the bottom right-hand corner. But if a screen reader user has a headset and presses pause on the headset, it pauses the screen reader audio, not the video audio. So once again, they can't use that site. And lastly, we have a layer trap. The user should not be trapped on a non-visible layer. So this applies to all users, but it's mostly encountered by screen reader users and sometimes keyboard users, and it's in both methodologies. So this is an example here. You've got a website, you open the menu, and the focus stays underneath the menu, which means that the screen reader user can never access the actual menu contents. The keyboard user can never access the menu contents and can't even see what their keyboard is doing. So the next step is test mobile specific issues. So we have a bunch of categories in this step, which includes alternatives, display, actionable items, navigational aids, audio and video, forms, and mobile desktop interaction. So let's see an example from the document. So one of the requirements is touch gestures. Any touch gesture must have an alternative, accessible, actionable item. And this is very similar to WCAG 2.1, Success Criterion 2.5.1, pointer gestures. So what do we mean by that? An example of a touch gesture is swiping up and down or left and right, dragging up and down or left and right, double tapping, tap and hold, tap and swipe, 2-pinch zoom, and press and long hold. And an example of alternative accessible gestures are a link, a button, a drop down, or a separate page with the same functionality. So each requirement has an about this requirement section. And for touch gestures, it reads, this requirement is particularly important for screen reader users. For example, if you require your user to swipe right to complete a purchase when the screen reader is on, the swipe right gesture moves you to the next focusable item and doesn't complete the purchase. You must be able to perform the same action by using a link, an up or down swipe, or some other gesture. Please note that this requirement is similar to the exit trap requirement that we just talked about. A failure of the exit trap requirement is that a user cannot escape from content or a page. A failure of the touch gestures requirement is that the user cannot choose content or a page, i.e. they are not trapped. So then there's a section on how to test. And so that reads, identify any site controls. If they require any of the following gestures, is there an accessible actionable item provided as an alternative? And that's swiping up and down or left and right, or dragging up and down or left and right, double tapping or two-pinch zoom, tap and hold or tap and swipe, and press and long hold. So this is an example of a pass. So here you, and this is very common, so here you have a weather page, and you can see there's in the middle of this the page, there's some images, and on the right hand side those images are cut off. Now this is a very common way of indicating that there is additional content available on swipe, but there's also at the bottom a see more link, and if you select that, that takes you to a page that has all the content in a linear fashion. So if you can't swipe, you can still access all that content. This is another example. This is Google Weather. Here you have a drag feature where you can drag to a particular time and it will tell you what the weather is, but they also operate as links. So that's a pass. And these examples are all in the documentation. And so the next step is test mobile assistive technology and feature support. And so there's just one requirement that you need to make sure works when it comes to all assistive technologies and features. So all actionable items and content can be accessed and activated by the following assistive technologies or when the following feature is enabled. And that's, as I said, for Android, talkback, keyboard and switch, magnification, remove animations, color inversion, grayscale, color correction, increase display size, increase font size, increase text size with Chrome, and simplified view with Chrome. And then for iPhone and iPad, it's voiceover, keyboard and switch, zoom, reduce motions, invert colors, grayscale, larger text for native apps only, reader view for mobile sites only, and reader view and increase text size for mobile site only. And as I said, you have to do the same on iPad. So let's just see an example from VoiceOver and from TalkBack. So the VoiceOver requirement is all actionable items and content can be accessed and activated by VoiceOver on iOS. So this is an example here. This is an article, and at the top you've got some social media buttons, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and Pinterest, and they don't have accessible names. And as a result, the VoiceOver just reads button, 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 button. This is another example here. This is TalkBack. And so you've got a crossword clue. Your focus is on the actual crossword clue itself. And if you activate that crossword clue, it doesn't take you to the actual part in the crossword. It actually just changes the crossword from a horizontal clue to a vertical clue. So what's next? So we need to update the documentation to include WCAG 2.2. There are 2 additional level A success criteria, is in my description. 3.2.6 consistent help, providing consistent help mechanisms. 3.3.7 redundant entry, information previously entered is auto-populated. There are 4 additional AA success criteria, also my description. 2.4.11, focus not obscured. The current keyboard focus is not hidden. 2.5.7, dragging movements. Dragging has an accessible alternative, so that sounds familiar. 2.5.8, target size minimum, targets have an adequate size, also familiar. 3.3.8, accessible authentication, providing easy methods of authentication. And then there are 3 additional level AAA success criteria. Once again, my description. 2.4.12, focus not obscured, enhanced. The entire keyboard focus is visible. 2.4.13, focus appearance, ensuring the keyboard focus indicator is visible to all. And 3.3.9, accessible authentication enhanced, providing easy methods of authentication. And then we need to include some additional assistive technologies and mobile features, such as voice control, the increasing text size and font color from reader view, and testing with a mouse. And we need to review existing test cases. So, for example, the text-to-speech traps that I mentioned earlier were only in the native app methodology. However, they've begun to occur on mobile sites. And mobile and desktop consistency is great, but there also should be consistency between websites and native apps as well. And then we need to remove some of the assistive technologies and mobile features. So there are certain types of tests that always generate the same results. So, you only need to test one of these things. So grayscale in iOS and Android, color correction in Android, color inversion in Android, and invert colors in iOS always fail together or pass together. So you only need to test one of those things. Reduce motion in iOS and remove animations in Android always fail together or pass together. So you only need to test one of those. And classic invert doesn't provide any additional testing information to smart invert, so that doesn't need to be tested. And we also want to create an online resource. I started doing that about a year ago, and then my long COVID kicked in again. So basically, currently these are Word documents, but it's better if they're a website, which is, of course, searchable, easily updated, more likely to be used, and, of course, more accessible. So I hope that was helpful. We would love you to be involved. Now, I don't care if you're a developer or a tester or a project manager, but if you would like to be involved in the committee, please email me at mobile23@accessibilityoz.com. And when we reconvene the committee, I'll be in touch. Don't feel like you don't know enough about accessibility or about mobile accessibility. The only reason I know all the stuff that I know is because of this committee. We all went out and did a lot of research. We talked to people with disabilities. This was the best way to learn about mobile accessibility. So just like to say thank you for coming today. And we've got a couple of minutes for questions. If you have any questions, please do put them in the chat. I've got Rosanna asking if the webinar will be posted on other sites as well. And yes, of course, it will be on YouTube, and it will be on this conferences page on the Accessibility Oz website, which I will find and put in the chat. Any questions?
Thank you for presenting on such an important topic.
Thank you.
Okay, if we don't have any more questions, then I'll see everybody next month. Thank you again.